your parents proud of your success with comic books?
My parents realized at least I had a steady job and it was paying a fairly good salary, and I was married and had a daughter, and we had a little home in Long Island, and I think that made them happy. I don't think they really gave much thought to the fact that the comics were successful or that I was becoming a little bit well known. I think that they weren't really aware of that.
What were some of the biggest strips you worked on with Jack?
The Fantastic Four, the Hulk, the Avengers, the X-Men.
How did Jack visualize your characters?
Jack would start drawing at the top, and he'd keep going till he reached the bottom, and that was it. It was as though it was all in his mind, and he was simply tracing the drawing. It was incredible.
How did Steve Ditko visualize your characters?
Steve was like a filmmaker. He knew how to tell a story in pictures as well or better than anybody. He and Jack Kirby were the two best that I've worked with at that particular thing, at taking a basic concept and drawing it so that they were contributing to the story. They were adding things and embellishing them, and they were making the original story look good. And I just have to say that Steve was the absolute best at that.
Tell us about the writing process.
As the writer, it was funny because I would really just write a treatment or an outline or just even discuss the broad points of the story, and I would let the artist draw it any way he or she wanted. They would fill in all the details, bring the artwork back to me in pencil, and I would put in all the dialogue and captions, hoping that it would meld beautifully with what they had drawn. And then the strip would be inked and lettered and blah, 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 and would go to the printer.
Was it ever your desire to influence your readers with your stories?
I didn't feel it was my place to discuss religion in any way or to tell our readers what they should believe or not believe in anything that might contradict the teachings that they had in their own family. So the only thing that I tried to stress in our books, and I felt nobody could disagree with this, was sort of love your fellow man. Don't judge somebody badly by the color of his skin or his religion or his race or nationality. And probably the best way to live is if you followed the code of Confucius centuries ago when he said, do unto others.
What were some of the early comic book genres?
Let's see, we did romance, we did horror, we did mystery, we did humor, we did animation, we did westerns, we did war. But we were batting those out so quickly, and I think some of them were realistic.
Tell us about the comic code. Were they particular about content?
At one time we had sent a Western comic book to the Comic Code Committee, and they sent back a page because one panel had been rejected. And I looked at the panel, and it was just a hand shooting a gun, and there was a puff of smoke coming out of the gun barrel. And I said, what's wrong with that? And they said, the puff of smoke is too big, it's too violent. So, okay, I made the puff of smoke a little smaller, sent it back to them, and they okayed it. So always remember, never make a puff of smoke that's too big. I mean, that's part of the insanity that was going on in those days.
Tell us about Cannon Films and their connection to Spider-Man.
There was a company called Cannon Films that got the rights to Spider-Man years ago, years and years ago. And other companies wanted to do Spider-Man, but they couldn't because Cannon Films had the rights to it. And they never came up really with the right script, or somehow they never did the movie, but they prevented all these other companies from doing it. And even when Cannon Films, I think I'm right about this, when the Cannon film option expired, the other companies couldn't do the film because Cannon had sold off so many rights They had sold off the distribution rights and the licensing rights and marketing, whatever it is, to a lot of different companies. And it was such a complicated situation that even though most of the big studios wanted to do Spider-Man, they couldn't figure out how to get through all the legal hassles and get all the rights to themselves. Finally, after years, obviously, they did work it out. And it's a lucky thing for mankind in general that we now have the Spider-Man movies.
Tell us more about the Silver Surfer.
When Jack brought the artwork to me, he had a picture of a guy on a flying surfboard flying all over the sky. I said, Jack, who's that nut on the surfboard? He said, well, I figured any godlike character like Galactus ought to have a herald whom he would send ahead of him to find planets for him. And I thought that was a good idea, a really cool idea, typical Jack Kirby.
How did the characterization of the Silver Surfer come about?
I started giving him dialogue that was a combination of Shakespearean and biblical talk. You know, he didn't just say, hey, there's a planet, I think I'll go tell Galactus, but what strange world do I behold? And, you know, and he worried he would never give Galactus a planet or tell him about one where there were intelligent beings. He wouldn't want Galactus to kill them. Anyway, I tried to put a lot of philosophy in the Silver Surfer's dialogue, things that I enjoy, my kind of sayings, and that was it.
Tell us about the college student as a comic book fan.
When I lectured in these colleges, and I would really meet these kids, because usually they invited me to dinner before the lecture, then we'd have meetings after the lecture, and I met dozens and hundreds and thousands of them. They were generally the smartest, brightest kids in the school. They were the ones who were studying psychology, sociology, comparative literature. They were thinkers. And it made me very happy when I realized the people who were interested in what we at Marvel were doing were the kind of people that we were proud to have as fans.
Any last thoughts, Stan?
Face front, hang loose, 'nuff said, Excelsior!